Unlabeled leadership is a volunteer service. We appreciate our guests for their stewardship and remarkable stories. We also appreciate listeners like you who back the show with star reviews and contributions.
Gary DePaul with Unlabeled Leadership. Welcome to episode 154. Ron Karr focuses on outcomes with a velocity mindset. Here's a shout out to listeners in Taipei City, Taiwan, West Java, Indonesia, Attica, Greece, Saxony, Germany, and in the United States, Bridge City, Texas, Cleveland, Ohio, Selma, North Carolina, and Albany, New York. With that, let's get started. Ron Karr is a leading sales success expert and an accomplished keynote speaker. With more than 36 years of sales and leadership experience, Ron shares his insights with global audiences. He's authored a book called Velocity Mindset, and I bought a copy. I wanted to share with you two quotations from it. With one, he talks about leadership. He writes, "Real leadership is all about making other people successful beyond their wildest dreams." Later in the book, he gives an example about Bob, a sales professional who was promoted to management. Listen to this. As a sales professional, Bob had been focused on his objective, which was to meet and exceed his quarterly numbers. He was really good at it. His own efforts supported that goal. He dropped everything to fix a problem, please the customer, and close deals at a remarkable rate. But when he was promoted, he didn't automatically transform into a leader. Bob's objective had changed, but he didn't. He kept his firefighter mentality, and his old tasks didn't support the new objective. Whenever a rep had a problem, he'd jump in to save the day. His people began to depend on him to close deals and fix their problems. As a result, they lost velocity. A leader's job is not to do other people's jobs. Their job is to make it possible for others to do their jobs well. That story captures how leadership has changed in the 21st century. Part 1. Influence by telling a story with data. A critical part of leadership is listening. We've spent our whole lives listening, and it seems like it's something that everyone is capable of doing. But when I'm talking about listening, I'm thinking at a different level. To effectively listen, you have to inquire to understand. Ron shares a sales story that illustrates nicely listening and specifically using inquiry. Here's Ron with this story.
I was basically selling to let's call it a large financial institution in the old World Trade Center on the 106th floor. I was dealing with the vice president of facilities. I always wanted a key account for that company. And finally, they said, okay, here's your first key account. And it happened to be an account that the salesman before me already closed the deal. So my job was to go in, make it work, and then hopefully increase the deal. His name was John. And I get out to his assistant's office and the gentleman said, "You sure you want to go in there?" I said, "Yeah, why?" He was a former Marine colonel and he's not happy with your company. I said, "I had no problem." So I walked in and I said, "John, how you doing?" He goes, "Shut up." I go, "Okay."
Wow.
Now, mind you, we're on 106th floor. First thing out of his mind is, I don't want to hear one peep out of you. This was a trading operation in a big financial institution, and we were selling these electronic timestamps that were computerized. And each stamp had to be the same time as somebody else. Otherwise, they could be up for lawsuits or the changing of prices. And his stamps were not working properly. And my company already went through everything. And they replaced all the machines, and they're still not working. So now he's telling me, "I don't want to hear a peep from you." He goes, "You got 2 weeks to fix this problem because I'm tired of hearing from the SEC. Otherwise, my assistant will throw your butt out this window.
Wow.
You're dismissed." So I left and I go, okay, that was a great meeting. I go back to the customer service manager. I said to him, I said, "What have we done?" He goes, "Is this job?" I go, "Yeah." He goes, "Forget it. I don't want to talk about it." So what are you talking about? "Do you know my P&L is suffering because of these people? They complain. My people go in there. They can't find the problem. We replaced all the machines, all the motors, and they're still having the issues. I give up. I don't have any more time for it." And I said, "Well, wait a minute. I get that you put a lot of effort into this thing and you're really upset, but we have an upset customer. Let me work with you to see if we can pinpoint what's going on here, because until we solve it, it's going to be a problem for both you and me. And he goes, oh man, I don't know how you keep getting me to say yes to you, but you keep making sense. At that time, it was in the early 80s. And I said, do you capture the serial numbers? He goes, no. I said, let's just start doing that. If we can develop a log and put that at the assistant's desk and just track the serial numbers that you're fixing every time you go there, let's at least see the data. And I promise you, I'll work that for you. So he grudgingly said yes. We did the log, and it just proved that really only about 20% of the machines were going down, not 100%. So after I had the data 2 weeks later, I walked into John's office. I said, John, don't need to get up. Here's the data. We're down to 20%. You know what? It's still not good enough. I'm going to get it better. But here's the data, what we're looking at. It's not 100%. You should feel better. I'll come back in a week and make you even feel better than that. So we got it down to 10%. I went into John's office and I said, look, these are mechanical machines. Anything that's mechanical, you can't promise to never, ever break down. The problem with your situation is if something breaks down, you need it replaced immediately because you can't wait. So my recommendation is we're at an acceptable level of 10%. We'll keep it lower. But if you need instantaneous fixes, my suggestion is you buy 20 extra machines and keep them as spares so you can immediately replace them. And he bought the idea. A year later, he gave me another order for another 1,000 units. And I remember as we were sitting there reviewing that account, both the customer, John, and the customer service manager on my side, when they both assessed the situation, they all had one statement for me. I said, Karr, I don't know how you do it, but you always take us to the edge of the cliff. And you're at the cliff, but you don't fall off. In other words, what they were complimenting was my level of persistence, that I wouldn't give up.
It's so powerful what you're saying. I'm just thinking about people in business in general. There's a tendency to not even get close to the edge of the cliff, either give up or back down or try something safer.
Right, because, it's their fears. And that's what I wrote in my new book, The Velocity Mindset, how our fears and the stories as to what we think is happening is really getting in our way from moving forward. What I've always lived by is that one way or another, this situation is going to work its way out. Whether or not it works its way out to my satisfaction depends on what I do about it.
And it's our fears that hold us back.
Yes.
I've worked a little bit in sales, enough to know that it is difficult, but it's powerful when you're able to do it.
Yes, but there's a deeper concept to this also, because in the Velocity Mindset book, which is for leaders, which, by the way, I think anybody in this world is a leader. You make decisions on your lives, your family lives. So we have to engage others to support us. So if you accept that premise, one of the things I say about leaders is that real leaders, what keeps them going is that they don't put the insane responsibility on their shoulders a lot of people do, which is they feel they have to have the answers up front. That's not a leader's job. A leader's job is to have the vision where they're going, ask the right questions to see what's necessary to get there, and then they'll get the answers. So a leader's job is to find the answers, not necessarily have them.
Part 2, trust and shifting from being task-oriented to purpose-oriented. In any organization, establishing and maintaining trust can be a challenge. With a new relationship, building it is so crucial because trust can be fragile. In this story, Ron talks about trust from a slightly different perspective than you might think. Again, here's Ron.
In order to lead anybody or to sell to anybody, the number one thing that you have to develop is trust. Trust is important for anybody to want to say yes to answer a risk and accept your premise and do what you're asking them to do. If they don't trust you, then it's hard for them to buy into you, basically.
Yeah.
So I was an EMT, emergency medical technician in Fairlawn, New Jersey. I was a volunteer. I was trained in basic life support, EMT, and I rode ambulance for my town as a volunteer. One day we had 2 back-to-back cardiac calls. First one was a code, where you're doing CPR, and that just tires you out because you're constantly pressing on someone's chest in a moving ambulance, trying not to fall over. And, it really drains you. And then you get to the hospital and hopefully the patient survives. In this case, the patient did not. So it kind of wears on you a little bit. And then immediately, as we're dropping off that patient, we get another call for another cardiac, which was not a code, thankfully. We go racing with lights and sirens, and we pull up to the house. I'm driving. My captain is next to me. I'm the man closest to the house. He goes, "You're the first man in. So I jump out of the rig, I grab the cardiac kit, I go flying up the stairs. Now remember, I just came from a code, so I'm already amped up. But the number one thing you're trained in EMT and basic first aid is you can have all the great medical skills you want, but if you do not maintain calm at the scene, you lost the patient and you lost the scene. Well, now imagine person's having a heart attack in the house. The door is open. I go flying up the stairs, running through the front door. By the time I come to a stop, I'm halfway through the living room and I'm looking at somebody in front of me. I said, "Where's the patient?" They said, "Right there." And they point behind me to a chair that's right by the door that I came flying by, where the patient was calmly sitting having a heart attack. And in comes this Attila of the Hun.
Oh boy.
That scares the shit out of him. What do? Well, I knew one thing. I broke the trust bond. I upset that individual. I did not maintain calm. And there was only one thing for me to do, turn the call over to my partner. And I looked at my partner and I said, "You got the call." And then he calmly is talking to the patient, developing the rapport. Everything worked out great. We get the patient to the hospital, and that's that. At the end of the day, what leaders have to really worry about is not their egos and not who gets glory or who does what. The main thing is the outcome. For whatever reason, the outcome is not in your favor because of something you did or didn't do, then delegate it to someone else who it is in their favor. Doesn't matter who does it, as long as it gets done and we move the needle forward.
It's an incredible story and a different aspect of leadership than what you typically hear in the corporate world. But there's some powerful lessons here. And the beginning part where you talk about developing trust, you go in, it's clear that you don't have that level of trust, but because of the urgency of the situation, it's about what can I do to establish trust immediately? And that's the turn it over, give the call to your partner.
Mm-hmm.
There's something very powerful in that story that people in non-emergency situations could really learn from. And you said it so well. At the end of the day, you need to get to a particular outcome or move in the right direction. And it may be just handing it over to someone else.
And we gain velocity that way. Imagine how much time I would have had to have wasted to apologize, make the guy feel better, time that he may not have had.
I'd like for you to explain the concept of velocity mindset. I think this is something real important. It's not the typical messaging that I hear from people. I think there's something unique here.
Sure. So what I find out when I work with leaders in the C-suite or salespeople or anybody in general is that we tend to be more task-oriented than purpose-oriented. Task-oriented is, what are the things I have to do? And many times we're so busy in a certain day completing tasks, we didn't have time for lunch and we're so exhausted at the end, but then we're disappointed because we look and for all the work we did, we didn't move the needle forward. We have to be purpose-oriented. Purpose-oriented is about the outcomes that we want to generate for ourselves and for the people who depend on us. And if we stay focused on the outcomes, which in our conscious mindset, then it will lead to better decision-making on our part. It will lead to us prioritizing better as to which tasks we really should be working on that will have the greatest impact on where we're trying to go. And that's what this fundamental definition of velocity mindset is. Everybody thinks velocity is just about speed, and it's not. If all you think about velocity is speed, then you'll probably achieve burnout. The true definition of velocity, as defined by physics, is speed with direction.
Yeah.
In this case, we're looking at direction as being our purpose, where we're trying to go. And that's the velocity mindset. Focus on what we're trying to produce. And that's what I've done all my life. Don't focus on the task. The task will become apparent and do the things that are necessary, like I did on that call with that heart attack patient.
I've seen situations in which people get so focused on the tasks at hand, they lose the purpose. That's when problems start to happen.
Right.
Personal things get in the way. They lose perspective. And I've seen this happen in so many meetings where people get so caught up in the moment that they forget the intent and the purpose and what they're trying to achieve as a group.
Well, that's why the first thing that anybody facilitating a meeting should be doing is to establish that purpose where we have buy-in from the people in the room. And the rest of the meeting is now talking about how do we get there.
It's a good reminder, definitely for starting a meeting to do that because it's so easy to get caught. But when it's fresh on your mind, it's easier to retain it. there's a tendency to have moments of lapse in which you forget your moral compass and you get caught up in the moment.
But there's a reason for that. Whenever someone says something to us or something is done to us, we create a story as to what we think that means. Stories are fueled by emotion. That's why speakers like me always use stories. You get people emotionally involved, engaged. Now, if it's positive emotion and it's pushing you forward, keep that story going. But if it's negative emotion that makes you go off track, like you're talking about, or makes you go off on a tangent because you're emotionally impacted by it, what you have to realize is that if that story is not serving you well, and here's the good news, then whoever wrote that story can change it. It's as simple as that. And when you think about it that way, it takes away all that pressure off your shoulders and it makes you start thinking of a different way. The point is, though, to acknowledge that it's just a story. Once you do that, that's half the battle. And you won't go off on tangents and take meetings down other areas, down other paths.
Yeah, it's so easy to observe something and tell yourself a story, is the way I like to phrase it. Interpret what you observe, usually a negative way, which may or may not be true.
Yeah, it is easy to get off the path. You're absolutely right. We're all human. But if you have that purpose driving you, and that purpose has its own emotion where you're passionate about doing it no matter what, that's what keeps you on the path, like I was with that patient. My purpose was to keep that patient alive.
Part 3, empathy, questions, and influence. Too often, people make assumptions about what others are thinking and feeling. That isn't really what it means to be empathetic. You need some more information than just your initial observations to really get a better idea of what's going on inside someone's head. Ron has some advice about how to do that and be more empathetic. Here's Ron to explain.
Yeah, so when we look for leaders or salespeople for our clients, and we don't get the talent, we have assessments that we use to help them pick the right talent. One of the traits that we look for is empathy. About an 80% out of 100, we look for that kind of a score. If you don't have empathy, then you're not really taking an interest in other people, what they're going through, what their issues are. And you're probably not going to ask enough questions. Questions is the key to influence, not telling, questions. Finding out about where people want to go, what their challenges are, what are their obstacles, and then presenting whatever ideas you have that will help them get to where they want to be. As a leader, as a salesperson, whatever role you're in, it's the same thing. If you really want to move forward in your position, help the people who depend on you get to where they want to be. When you help them become successful, your success is automatic.
So much of management, when you don't have empathy, you don't ask those questions, you don't get the information, you tend not to help the people around you to be successful. In fact, I think the opposite happens in traditional command and control, where you tend to either want to do it yourself or you want to tell people how to do it. When that happens, there's a tendency to not be empathetic and not to set your people around you up for success and give them the best environment to work in.
And you're absolutely right in what you're saying, but I could probably take that to a higher level. So I have a retainer client for about 9 years already, and I work with the C-suite in that company and their management team. And I was in the CEO's office one day, and it's a manufacturer. One of the production supervisors came storming in, cursing, going, "Yeah, blank, blank guy." I said, "What's wrong?" "He's on his cell phone and he won't get off, and he's making everybody else be late in the job." I said, "So what did you do?" I said, "I went in and told him and yelled at him to get off the damn cell phone." "What did he do?" He said, "Everybody else on a cell phone. Why should I get off mine?" "And what did you do?" I yelled at him to get off the cell phone and walked away in a huff. I said, "How well did that serve you?" And I said, "Let's role play that. You be him and I'll be you." And all I did was repeat the same conversation he had. And then he started laughing. He goes, "Stop." He goes, "Look, I get it. I wouldn't have said yes to myself either." All right, well, let's change it. What do we know about that guy? Let's have a little empathy. What's he trying to achieve? He wants to become a master welder. What do you need? You need to have great welding quality and you need to be on time. How's his quality? Perfect. That's why we love him. How's his time? Usually it's on time, but this time he's making everybody late. And if he's late, what happens to him becoming a master welder? It delays it. It usually takes about 2 years. So just go up to him, start with that purpose, that outcome first. That's the issue, not the cell phone. And say, "Hey, you want to be a master welder?" And he did that. And he goes, "Yeah." And he goes, "The master welder, you need two things, quality and timeliness. Your quality is phenomenal, You're just a little bit late on this job. What do you think we can do to get you on target so you can stay on the path to becoming the master welder? And all of a sudden, he was amazed because that same guy that was yelling at him, I don't want to get off my cell phone, started giving ideas on how he can speed up the job. And before you know it, the job was sped up and they got back on track. So what was the difference? The only thing difference was what the leader decided to concentrate on in the conversation. You attack the person, you don't care what's important to them. All you're doing is trying to fix what they're doing. Then all you're doing is creating a CYA, cover your conversation. Then they're intent on one thing, just protecting themselves, not helping you come to a decision on how to fix this. But when you change the conversation to where they're trying to go and what's important, and then asking for their help and trying to figure out the solution, all of a sudden the solution comes. And the point is that you could be a manager, but it doesn't mean you're a leader. We have lots of leaders who do not have management titles, and they're more influential than managers are today.
My thanks to Ron Karr. If you'd like to learn more about Ron, go to the show notes. I'd like to thank you for listening. This is Gary DePaul. Until next time, lead on.